Good evening. You're watching Redwood Wonk. I'm with Dave Frank. My name is Eric Kirk. We've got a lot of news to cover. As the dust settles from the election, a lot has been decided. There's still a few races out there which we are waiting to decide. Races take a lot of time to count in California because we have so many mail-in ballots and we do not have gerrymandering in this state. So that means there are a lot of competitive races that come down to a lot of votes that you have to be counted before we know. There are still about 4 or 5, I believe 5 House races to be decided, a lot of local races to be decided. Well, the biggest news since last week, the Senate, the Democrats are going to hold on to the Senate. With the win in Nevada, which went against my prediction, the Cortez Masto held on to defeat Laxalt, the Republican challenger. So it really surprised me actually in Nevada to guarantee that the Democrats have 50 seats in the Senate. And so the runoff in Georgia in December will determine whether or not they get a cushion of 1 seat. We'll discuss, the significance of that as to, whether or not they'll possibly be Manchin or Sinema, switching parties. I don't think that's going to happen, but whether or not they also would be able to. Anyway, we'll talk about that. However, officially as of this afternoon, if the networks are all correct, the Republicans have 218 confirmed wins in the House. It means that they have officially won the House. But upon my looking at the races, the 7 races that are left, the Democrats have 200 called races. And looking at the 7 races that are remaining, I calculate that Democrats will win 5 of them. The Republicans will win 2, which will leave 220 to 215, which is even more razor thin than you can imagine. In fact, that was the difference that the Democrats had going into this. So it's and we can discuss some of the individual races. A lot of fascinating flips. The Democrats actually came away with, I believe 6 flips. There may be 1 or 2 more, and you have to count Alaska as a flip because it was a flip in August. It looks like it's going to be a flip this time around too, because Peltola has about 47% of the vote in the first round, and later in the month when they hold the second round of the instant runoff, she's going to she only needs 3% of the vote to defeat Palin. I don't think Palin can come from behind. Anyway, a lot to discuss in there. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, huge race. Karen Bass, who was my prediction to be Biden's vice president, formerly Congresswoman, has defeated her opponent, Rick Caruso, multimillionaire, billionaire, who spent all kinds of money. You would have thought he was running for president to win the mayor spot in Los Angeles. Outspent her 10 to 1. She has defeated him and will be the next mayor. Governor, nicknamed by Democrats Scary Carrie Lake, has lost in Arizona. And in fact, the Democrats have had clean sweep in all of the swing states against all of the election deniers in the swing states that matter. There are a lot of races that we can discuss, but I'm going to let Dave, if you want to jump in here and talk about some highlights.
Well, cool. Thanks. It's like I joked on Election Day that it's like Christmas. It's like a holiday for people like us who love to follow these things. But nowadays it really takes days or even a full week for the dust to settle. So it's just like you said, just before we met today, they announced that 218th seat has been determined. So it's official. For a while there, I was looking at the numbers, and there was, I think, close to around 20 20 different races that were really close and undecided, but then of those, about only maybe like 10 were potentially in the mix. And then there's all this like gaming out of which ones may or may not. They were talking about the House, of course, but as it turns out, the House, the Democrats were not able to hold the House, which totally makes sense. And as it stands, it looks like they'll end up. I'm not sure what number you said, but when I looked at it, one of the things that I saw was about 221 to 214, which is like really that's three. That's four total above what control is. One of the sort of wild card outliers. I heard a statistic from the oh gosh, I forgot what year it was now, but there was a year like in the late 19th century, I think, where 14 elected representatives were not alive in the January when the new House took over. And I'm not predicting that a bunch of people are going to die, but I just want to say that it just shows how narrow this majority really is. And part of the reason I mention that isn't because we expect Democrats to have any kind of control, but the flip side of that is that it's going to be pretty hard probably for the Republicans to manage the House the way Kevin McCarthy had a group that was dissented. And I don't know how far into the weeds you want to get on this, but when they did a straw poll for his speakership, it's not a binding vote because the true binding vote is the whole House where he needs the full 218 to become the actual speaker. But within his caucus, they did a straw poll. And there's about 31 dissenters who wanted to stick with somebody a little bit more extreme than him. I say stick with, I guess pivot towards a more people would say Trump friendly or more radical right-leaning House. Not that these people actually are going to try to undermine him, but they wanted to vote as like this was their opportunity for a dissent vote. So that's just a foreshadow of what we can expect in terms of his challenges that he faces there. One other thing I'll add is similarly in the Senate, there was some pressure. There was a small challenge against the leadership there, in part projecting. I heard Ted Cruz kind of blaming blaming Senate leadership for the outcome, the underwhelming outcome. We're going to talk more about that a little bit, about the blame game, but there's also a degree of dissent, Mitch McConnell's caucus as well. So that's where we are. Is that it's uncertain times, but at the same time, the gridlock is what people appreciate right now. If it was both Republican-controlled sides of the Congress, people would not know what to expect. All bets would be off. It really could undermine all sorts of things. But right now, the gridlock is actually a little bit of a stabilizing force.
Well, really quickly, I'll tell you why I think it'll be 220 to 215. In Colorado, Boebert and Frisch are about 50-50, but Boebert has, it looks like about a little 1,200 lead, and the analysis is that the areas that have left to be counted favor Boebert. I don't know that that's true, but that seems to be the consensus. Alaska, as I discussed, Peltola, she's got 48% of the vote now. There's just no way that in the second round she can't grab at least 2% of all the rest of the votes because she gets to have those 48 to keep it. In California, there are 5 districts that have yet to be called, and I will give one to the Republicans. Kiley and Jones in the 3rd district. We've talked about that one before. District 3, it's up in the Sierras along the Nevada border. Kiley is ahead by about 5%. It is possible Jones could come from behind. He was ahead for a while early on because the early ballots tend to favor these days progressive Democratic candidates. It's possible because there's about 41% of the vote remaining that Jones could come from behind again, but it does seem like a pretty big lead at this point, about 9,000 votes. So I'm sort of giving that one to the Republicans, but it's not called for a reason. California District 13, which extends the valley all the way from the down in Fresno area up to Stanislaus, but is fairly progressive. Gray has pulled ahead of Duarte, the Democrat Gray, by about 1,000 votes. He was behind slightly for most of the race, but again, I think at this point, any Democrat that's ahead is probably going to stay ahead with the remaining votes. That's why I'm sort of counting that. The same thing in District 22 to the south. Pardon me, this is reversed. I need to reverse that. Valadeo is ahead of Salas. I'm not sure that there's enough votes for Salas to come. That he's behind, but 50% expected to vote. But I'm told that there's the areas that need to be counted. This one I just can't call because this one Valadeo's been ahead the whole time. But even though it's 5%. People are saying that there's a bunch of votes that are going to benefit Salas, so I'm not going to call that one. But Katie Porter is ahead by about 7,000 votes with 51% of the vote, and everything's going to benefit for her from here on. And existentially, I just don't see her losing, even though she's in a much tougher district than she's been in for a long time. And to her south in the 49th, Mark Levine is way ahead by like 14,000 votes with 53% of the vote, and for the same reasons, I just don't see him losing. So that may be 214 to 221, but if these other people are right about District 22, although as I'm looking at it, boy, I'm a little more skeptical about that. It's probably more like 221 to 214. We'll see. So that's why we're talking about that. Talking a little bit about the impact of this, though, it's going to be close no matter what. This is not a typical first midterm red wave or wave that you'd expect of the party not in the presidential power. And what kind of impact is this going to have on policy? Well, if this is not a mandate for Republicans to go off on a hardcore right-wing agenda, it's definitely not. There's going to be pressure on them to govern, to actually govern. And what is that going to mean? These are the difference is going to involve a lot of Republicans who know that they could very easily be out in 2 years if they are playing partisan games, if they get caught up and there's too much of an emphasis on investigations of Hunter Biden's laptop and or investigating Merrick Garland for what. It's just or impeaching Joe Biden. And it didn't really work out for the Democrats, who I think had a lot more than they're going to have. Impeachment apparently it seems to be just too political a process, even if you've got him dead to rights. I think Nixon being ousted on the threat of impeachment was an anomaly. I think it just doesn't happen. So what are the Democrats going to do? We should point out that both Mitch McConnell and McCarthy in their leadership positions fought off challenges from the right. Rick Scott got, I think, about a dozen votes. I don't even know who even ran against McCarthy, but he fought that off, shrugged that off pretty easily. Not a lot of. We'll talk more about the impact of Trump later, but it doesn't seem like the right wing is in a very powerful position right now. We'll talk about the impact, of that in the second session, but it looks like there may be some room here for governing that hasn't been on the Republican agenda lately. McConnell back in January didn't want an issues-based campaign. He didn't think it was a winner. But there needs to be some questions about pointing to McConnell about that. Maybe this should have been a policy issues one, and maybe that wore thin for some people. I mean, I think that we need to really look at the Dobbs effect. The media is still not wanting to really discuss that in detail, but maybe also people in the middle got a little wary of the fact that the Republicans weren't proposing anything except for Social Security and Medicare cuts.
Yeah, so you brought up a ton of interesting points. Thank you for the clarity on those last remaining seats, and just to add to what you said, Andy Biggs, Arizona Representative Andy Biggs, was the person who decided that he was going to challenge McCarthy for the speakership. And so he's one of the more extreme members of the House, and like I said, he was able to get another 30 people on his side to just at least challenge. So there's again, I know we say this a lot, but there's overlapping areas of concern here or consideration. The mandates in the House and the Senate are obviously very different. I think Mitch McConnell was a little bit more contrite in the sense that he was calling out, saying, look, we did not appeal to the right, appropriately to the right folks, but that's because we put forward candidates that weren't the right folks. So he kind of, that's a backhanded way of basically putting a little bit of distance between himself and Trump's line of argumentation for this past election. I think there's been a sort of a universal impulse. Maybe not fully universal, but to try to pivot and get past the baggage. But that might be temporary. We're going to talk about that in the next section. One last thing worth mentioning, though, I think I mentioned this in our previous coverage, but it's official now. There's going to be 12 women in governors' mansions this year, starting next year. Which is according to 538, I think, or Politico, I don't recall where I saw them say this exactly, but that there's only been 45 women governors total in history. So the fact that we've got 12 right now, that's a pretty big move, and that sort of buttresses what you've said, that people are we are advancing and modernizing, and thinking more broadly about leadership and inclusion.
All right, we'll be talking more about this, obviously, as this story develops.
I don't think I've made mistakes. I mean, every time somebody says I made a mistake, they do the polls and my numbers go up. So I guess I haven't made any mistakes.
We showed up and we demonstrated that we would not have our voices silenced by a Republican Party that across the country had a singular intention on suppressing the right to vote.
Some Democratic senators seem to imagine they could just break the rules on a razor-thin majority. Nothing would stand between them and their entire agenda, a new era of fast-track policymaking.
The Republican Party moved very far away from reality. And the fact that you got colleagues of mine in the Senate who refuse even today to acknowledge that Donald Trump lost the election. How do you deal with that?
Joe Biden is the president we need right now. Battle-tested, forward-looking, honest, and authentic. He has never forgotten who he is fighting for.
Okay, related topic. A lot of blame game going on. And of course, the big topic, the sort of elephant in the room, Donald Trump. A lot of people in the Republican Party starting to point the finger at him, blaming him. Fox News is completely turned on him. Rupert Murdoch's papers, Trumpty Dumpty headlines and and the like. But also just a complete repudiation of him and his attack, as we discussed last time, on DeSantis, DeSanctimonious, as Trump called him. Trump, of course, last night gave sort of a half-hearted announcement of his campaign in 2 years, not really getting things rolling for it. It was just kind of an announcement that he's in it. DeSantis has traditionally said that he's not going to run if Trump runs. I don't know that he's going to hold up to that because, as we've discussed, DeSantis is like the lion of the hour for the Republicans. So the biggest clear-cut win for the Republicans came in Florida. They just cleaned house there. He's got the place completely gerrymandered for the Republicans. The Democrats there are just completely discouraged. I mean, that is like the Republican central success story of all the places. I mean, if you want to talk about where Republicans are happiest, perhaps there in New York, where there were some flips because the Democrats there really messed up. But that's not going to last in New York. Probably in 2 years, some of those New York seats will flip back. Florida, until the Democrats have a major, religious conversion or something and completely change their way of doing things and can figure it out, Florida and DeSantis is, by some accounts, the leader of the party. That's what they're saying on Fox News. This is what they're saying. But the question I have is that really even fair? First of all, Mitch McConnell, as I said in the last segment, is partly responsible for this, I think, by not emphasizing issues. First of all, if Mitch McConnell had made this about policy, and for the past 12 years, actually, he's made it about power, not policy. He's been ruthless in that. From my perspective of political history, he made Trump possible to begin with, and he's made it so much about power and so vacuous when it comes to policy. He could have had the Senate this time if he had made it interesting enough for someone like Sununu to run. But, and Sununu would have been a Senate elect right now. But Sununu didn't want anything to do with it, and so apparently so did a lot of moderates not want anything to do with it. I think Trump is just a symptom. I think the Republicans have a big problem in that they don't have a vision of anything except power at this minute to block things, to keep I hate to go back to my vulgar leftist roots, but it really does look like they're just basically blocking government from doing anything so rich people can get rich. I mean, this is what it really looks like to me. Just obstruct, but rich people get rich. Let people do their thing, because there's really nothing else that they have to offer other than the only policy initiatives that they offered in the past month was to cut Social Security and Medicare, and that may have cost them the election because they probably shouldn't have let that slip until afterwards. I will say something, is that Schumer did something that was not election oriented, because he could have jammed the Republicans with this a month ago, but he wanted to get it passed. Is that today the Senate actually voted to pass, with help of 12 Republicans, the overturning the Defense of Marriage Act to restore full faith and credit so that same-sex marriages will be recognized in all 50 states. This will repudiate and render Clarence Thomas's threats to revisit the 2015 Supreme Court case, because it won't mean anything. Once Congress passes this, it won't make it so all states have to marry people. But if you get married in California, they're going to have to recognize it in Arkansas. So this passed. McConnell is not forcing his people to not do it because he knows the writing is on the wall. Anyway, I'm going to let you in on this, but when it's all about power, you don't stand in the way of that. They certainly didn't campaign on this. So, getting back to Trump, where is Trumpism right now? Is that to blame? Is Trumpism to blame for reducing the wave to a ripple, to a red ripple? And where are the Republicans, and what is their future?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked in the past about how sometimes it's a challenge to make national generalizations because all politics are local, especially in an election year like this, where we're looking at the granular level, each congressional district, each senatorial race in its own context. But there is obviously, and has been for a long time, a national narrative here, and a couple things stand out. One thing. I think it's interesting that Saturday Night Live did a skit this week, and their cold open was a Fox News morning show where Trump is usually very welcome. He calls in and he talks, and he's buddy with them. He's a media star, of course. I mean, that's where he comes from, besides being a real estate developer. But they did this skit where one of those, like, hey, look, we got the memo. We're not supposed to take your calls anymore. We're just not that into you. And they pushed him off the screen. Basically, they gave him the cold shoulder. And that, it's funny. That's a joke. That's satire. But the truth behind that is that it's obviously clear that the Murdochs the family that controls Fox News and their global media empire. They're ready to turn the page. Losing the momentum, losing the historic momentum that happened in this midterm, the anticipated 20, 40, 60 point swing, control of both houses. We've got, quote unquote, they get their agenda. At least, they can control the narrative. This kind of repudiation of, the Trump style and the Trump candidates, that seems to be a common theme. So not just Senator Mitch McConnell, majority leader, or for not the majority leader, minority leader, not just him saying, look, we've got a candidate problem. Like he made it clear when they could read the tea leaves that there was an issue with Trump-backed candidates. But also, you pointed out this is not just speculation. A lot of times people say, oh, you guys talk about rumors, you talk about speculation. But when the front page of the New York Post is repeatedly hammering down on Trump the way it is, and not just like in a funny way necessarily, but he announced he's running for, he made the overtures that he's going to run for president for sure. That's what he said. We could talk a little bit about that because it was a little bit of a flop, to say the least. But I just want to make this point. At the very, very bottom of today's New York Post, there was a line that said something. Hold on, I got to get it just so I don't get it wrong. Florida man announces he will run for president. Page 26. So this is the guy that typically would, Murdoch and Fox News, like they were all about him, giving him, people estimated it was, multiple billions of dollars of free airtime leading up to his election, his first election, second election. He's gotten billions of dollars of free airtime from them, and they are apparently ready to turn the page. So the question is, you had asked, is it, who's the leader of the party? What's the tone, finger to the wind? What's the tone? I think the dust is still settling a little bit, but there's an awful lot of people out there. By that I mean, relevant leadership within, whether it's the House, the Senate, or the party apparatus that are really are making plans to figure out a new path. With Trump's support being, a solid, 3 out of 10 of the Republicans that would go to the mat for him, et cetera. That's a really significant portion of their party, but it's not a majority.
No,
so
but
they're
but
ready.
What happens,
they're ready.
But what happens if he does run? And even more importantly, if he doesn't run, does that 3 out of 10 show up? I mean, he expanded the party base, right?
Yeah.
These are people who didn't come out. Part of the reason that the Trump effect, that the polls are so off, is that these people didn't fit into the likely voter models because they never voted. They rarely voted before. He expanded the base of Black and Latino and other type of people who voted, not because there were Latino voters who had voted Democrat so much and now were voting for him, but people who hadn't voted before, who were brought into the process. Will they stay in the process if he's not there?
So his style and his substance were to kind of call out the hypocrisy, and also, he's a table flipper. So he's to a certain extent, it's a destructive force within the norms of politics, but to a core group of people, that's the appeal. That he could say, look, I'm a billionaire and I gave my money to both parties because they're both so corrupt. I know that that's how this works because that's how I got where I am. And that there's an appeal to that for people to say, I'm paraphrasing, to go back to Saturday Night Live, Dave Chappelle said, people, if you talk to people in rural Ohio where Dave Chappelle lives, that's the appeal, that there's a person who stands up and speaks truth to power. These people give him slack. And it's not just those core people that show up at his rallies, decked out in a red, white, and blue, and talk about QAnon and the more maddening aspects of Trump's base. There's other folks who are like, look, he's getting us this $1 trillion tax cut. He's getting us these ... Supreme Court justices. Maybe he hasn't accomplished a whole bunch, but he's gotten some core things done. And the Supreme Court justices that are really quite radically undermining the some of the legal foundations, whether it's rights-based foundations or whether it's administrative regulatory framework. This is, as Steve Bannon likes to point to, it is an assault on the administrative state, and maybe Trump's not clever enough to know what he unleashed, and he might not be have the capacity to pivot from he's obviously at a low point right now, because it's about relative power, and with DeSantis's relative power on the rise, like Trump light, with so many losses, like Carrie Lake's a good example. She was out there belligerently, the governor candidate for Arizona. She was belligerently talking about how, you guys are going to have to deal with us now. We're going to teach you like it was condescension from a position of disruption. And I think people voted against disruption. So where do people stand? I think that the style of DeSantis, where he's actually engaging on the topics of choice for people, things that are a little bit more calculated, a little bit more uplifting, as opposed to what you pointed out, Eric, which is the Mitch McConnell's style, his legislative capacity, his whatever some people call his brilliance, was just block everything. Like we enough power to stop people from making progress. That was enough for them. But I think that's not going to fly. And one last thing, sorry to filibuster here, but Rick Scott, who says, hey, I'm going to challenge you, Mitch McConnell, because of the election failures, that's more of the same. He's the guy who came up with the idea of let's end Social Security and Medicare as we know it. And he had a list, almost like a contract with America. He had a list of 10 pretty fringy type things that Republicans were like, what are you doing? You're giving them something to run against. Why would we say all these terrible things out loud? Like, Rick, what are you doing? That's no way to get everybody reelected. And it turns out that the critics were right, and he didn't earn the leadership. He didn't earn a turning of the page. So the moderation seems to have prevailed, but they got to find solid ground under their feet.
Well, I mean, a couple of things is okay, you had a bunch of Trumpy candidates running, election deniers, but don't seem to be willing to, with the exception of Carrie Lake and a few local people, they don't seem to be willing to deny their own losses. They're all wimping out. Mastrano, guy up in New Hampshire, Bolduc, the general, they're all accepting their losses graciously, which in the eyes of Trumpers are wimps. So they don't have that movement of there's a grand conspiracy, a deep state behind anybody. They need that, it's all horrible. And this is happening. And Trump was already screaming that there was voter fraud in Nevada, but Laxalt wasn't going along with it. I mean, I saw people online already saying, why is it taking so long? There were 24 hours of them not counting. And I'm like, where did it say that? Please give me a source. And they didn't have a source, right? They said, I'll give it to you later. And then he disappeared, right? So it's just, why is it taking so long to count in California? They've got all of the counting's all done in Florida. And I had to point out, no, the counting's not done in Florida. It's just that everything's gerrymandered, so there are no competitive races in Florida. But they're still counting in Florida. The same amount of votes are still not done counting, pretty much, except we have a lot more mail-in votes. So there's so the discussion's out there, but you've got to be, you don't have a big movement screaming, it's all fraud, it's all happening. So if you don't have Trump doing this and a lot of Trump candidates doing it, I mean, it looks like that movement is dying down. And if you don't have that, what have you got? I mean, in terms of Trump, and it looks like he didn't start a campaign and going, well, we've got this was stolen from the Republicans again. I think that's what he was hoping to do, and yeah, it didn't happen. It was so it looks like he's petering out. So the question is, can DeSantis fill those shoes and keep those people in the party? Because without those voters, they start losing to Democrats, because the Democratic base has been increasing as more Latinos are becoming citizens and their children are becoming of age, and more young people are moving into these other states. We go back into the trajectory of the Democratic Party and progressives, becoming more there. They've got a problem. They need those Trump voters to be there, and if they're not there, they need DeSantis to be the Schrodinger's cat candidate. He's got to do it. So we'll see if he can do that, but he can't do it if Trump is attacking him. Anyway, we will be discussing this probably over the next 2 years.
Okay.
Friends, I'm proud to greet you from Ukraine, from our capital city of Kyiv, a city that is under missile and airstrikes from Russian troops every day, but it doesn't give up. And I have the honor to greet you on behalf of the Ukrainian people, brave and freedom-loving people who for 8 years have been resisting the Russian aggression. Those who give their best sons and daughters to stop this full-scale Russian invasion. Right now, the destiny of our country is being decided. The destiny of our people.
All right, we are going to move off of the election topic because, with all the election news, huge news in the Ukraine, the Russia-Ukraine war happened last week. The huge break for Ukraine, just as the war is going into its winter, where probably there won't be a whole lot of movement of the line, but the first major city to fall in the Russian invasion last February was Kherson, city of I think is about 500,000, not much smaller than San Francisco, fell and has been held by the Russians ever since. Was retaken by the Ukrainian military after a front, an initiative that has gone on, I think, for 2 or 3 months. I'm not sure. I think it began in August, but really in earnest in September. Use of the long-range accurate rockets to begin with, but and at a cost. Both sides lost a lot of people in this, a lot of destruction of military hardware. I don't know how many civilians were killed. I don't think that a lot of the bombs landed in the city proper. We got to see people celebrating in the streets, though it's kind of subdued because they've been under an ordeal. We're just starting to learn the horror stories. I'm dreading that. Probably won't be as bad as Mariupol when that gets eventually retaken. But at the same time, as they're taking, General Milley is advocating a new round of peace talks, believing that this is a really good time to maybe seize, while Ukraine does have the advantage, that maybe this would be good a time for leverage, because he's saying, basically as a military person, expert, that there is no outright military solution here. Neither side can win this. But he was calling for new talks. He's actually trying to talk to his counterpart in Russia. The Russian counterpart is not returning his phone calls, but to try to get it going. Ukraine, Zelensky is resisting the calls, basically saying, "Well, I'm all for talking, but I don't know what I have to offer. I cannot." Put any territory on the table. I'm going to be expected to give up Crimea or Donetsk or some other property. I don't know what I have to offer. I don't know what I have to say, right? So it's a really tough time. And the question is what is this is very interesting, because General Milley is actually kind of liberal. guy. We've seen him in politics in other contexts. He's accused of being woke, actually. In a lot of ways, and an ally of Biden in some ways. He So it's very interesting, and we also have McCarthy, who is going to be the House leader, the House Majority Leader, say that there's not going to be a blank check anymore, but he's kind of backed off that, it's very unlikely that that the Republicans are going to want to do anything that would put into jeopardy the Ukraine fighting capability, I was surprised that Biden, hasn't really trying to take credit for this. I mean, this is a big success of his policy, but he's been very subdued about that, very, not wanting to grandstand about that from the beginning. Probably, thank God. You can imagine other people. I'm not even just talking about Trump, but other presidents doing that. There's a lot to criticize Biden for, but the way he's handled Ukraine is probably just. I don't know that we could have a better president for that, quite frankly. I can criticize a lot of other things, his handling of Afghanistan, and other aspects, but his handling of Ukraine has just been. I don't know that I can have any criticism of it. So, but this is something that that is it seems to be working. And maybe Milley is part of a policy to try to get some movement towards some sort of resolution that could have economic impacts across the globe. Dave, what do you got to say about this?
Yeah, so it's obviously extremely complicated. Part of what you'd said is that the president is kind of walks a tightrope here. The White House, the administration, the apparatus of state, not just him as a person, both realizing that this is an age-old adversary that is acting up under an authoritarian tyrant, so to speak, who maybe he's out in front of his skis. He's gone ahead and tried to recreate a history that's not accurate, impose an empire that doesn't have the capacity, and is still trying to somehow shape the narrative in this fake world of Putin and his orbit. So the president is managing the relationship with an adversary that is harming an ally, and committing atrocities and war crimes and just destructive capacity, unleashing destructive power against civilians. So there's this awful situation, knowing that the West, NATO, the United States, the allies around the world do not want a full-blown escalation in any way. So it's one of those walk softly, carry a big stick things. Thank God the Ukrainian people have been trained and military have been being trained and equipped for a long time. The world's consolidated behind them, and so we are where we are. But one thing is that parallel to that, on top of that, this unconditional support as long as we can. Well, there's a U.S. political backlash to those types of declarations about the cost because of the history that we have both in Iraq and Afghanistan, and so there's this need to lead and illustrate and show and lead by example that these are different. The misadventures in the Middle East and the misadventures, the way we withdrew from Afghanistan after 20-year perpetual war, that's a very different situation here, and it's really hard. It's really hard for leadership to articulate that, but apparently, so far so good. But all of that said, no war has ever ended without diplomacy. You have to negotiate. Not to say no war, unconditional surrenders like World War II. Those are rare. It's very rare that you're doing a maximalist unconditional approach. That's not in the cards here. That's kind of why I'm not talking about it. All this said, the success in Kherson getting Russia to retreat across the Dnipro River, and kind of retrench. That's status quo. What Milley's saying is now's a really good time. It's winter. We're typically not going to fight in winter. Now's a really good time for people to start, with their wish list, the red lines. This is the priority. Not even getting into the food implications for the cost of food, the access to food, the hunger that it's causing around the world, and the really unfortunate impact on the cost of energy to Europe primarily, but to the world more broadly. Those are second level concerns here. So I think it's about managing. There's two things. One is managing the war, and the other is managing the public opinion at home. And I'll agree with you that I think this administration is doing a really good job, despite there's a dissenting group of Republicans, and there's also the people like not to give her too much credit, but Tulsi Gabbard is out there kind of raising her own stature by relentlessly hitting this topic in a way that she thinks is going to resonate with folks who have those recollections of Iraq and those recollections of Afghanistan, and think, look at this military industrial complex, all they want is war. She's on that line of thought, but it really takes vision and stamina, I think, to just say, like, there's more at stake than relitigating prior policy failures. I don't mean to belabor this in any way, but I think whether it's no matter what kind of resistance that the new Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, no matter how much resistance he wants to put in place, I don't think it's in the United States' best interest to undermine Ukraine, and who can really negotiate from a position of strength through its successes on the ground. So we are at a really important pivotal time. That the details about the negotiations about where the lines are going to get drawn, I do think not to dominate here for an extended period of time, but one last piece on this. I've said this before a bunch of times. Russian Navy, their home base is in Crimea. They need to negotiate about that. The rest is Putin's misadventure that he ought to be rightfully walked back from, and to a certain extent, any support that we can continue to give to undermine him, we should do that.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, who knows if McCarthy was even really serious about his skepticism, or if he was just pandering to the America First crowd within, the Trump the delegation of Congress. I mean, it's not even clear. He's gutless. I mean, I'm sorry. He's shown himself to be from the beginning. So it's really hard to say. I definitely don't think that that they would want to be the party that came in and then all of a sudden the Ukraine starts losing ground because the funding happened. I don't even if it was coincidence, I don't think they want to be the party where that happened. I think they want to make sure that they keep that funding up. So I don't see it. And like I said, that wing of the party is kind of been discredited this election and pushed back. So I don't see it happening. I don't see a big backlash because of what happened with the Polish situation. It does appear to have been Ukrainian rockets, but the blame seems to be going to Russia anyway, because this is because S happens, and this is a war that Russia started, and this was they were trying to this was something 300 that was trying to shoot down a Russian missile that was aimed at Ukrainian civilians, and it didn't work, and it went across the border.
A couple things you talked about here that I think I know we have limited time, so I'll just mention them real quickly.
Go ahead.
One is the president's capacity to lead and sort of set the tone for the U.S. domestic audience and for Congress. He was at the G20 meeting recently, and we are the Western Alliance has had a difficult time kind of reining in the position of China and also the position of India, who are sort of have some self-interested economic issues at hand. China maybe a little bit its own domestic audience because Xi was looking to prop up his own national posture domestically. But as long as Biden was de-escalating tensions with Taiwan, I think that was somewhat of a success. But also the fact that they met leader to leader, and it puts a little bit of distance between, I don't know how much, but between Putin and Xi, that's probably not an unconditional alliance that goes all the way to defensive. Probably is just sort of moral and economic, because otherwise there would already be Chinese support, and that hasn't happened. But you've also talked about those weapons that the defense, the missile defense system. Apparently, the sort of mistake that Ukraine did when defending itself, that it was a Soviet era piece of weaponry, missile defense. And so so what's the U.S. interest here is to make sure that investments are made in a modern system that would better benefit them and defend them against the potential, because as of right now, Russia's got like 5,000 jets or something like that. So if Russia really wanted to do something massively provocative, they could, but they went into this thinking they could kind of, I was going to say a curse, but they're not all in. I think I saw a stat, nearly 5,000 Russian soldiers were killed in the first few days, 10,000 in the first few weeks, nearly 100,000 killed. They don't have effective supply lines for logistics. They've got inferior maintenance schedules, inferior training. So there's an emperor has no clothes element to the paper tiger, Potemkin army, however you want to say, which is appropriate because that was Crimean War, where they had all these things that looked like there was a posture of military superiority, but that's what the Potemkin War is. That in fact it was just a paper tiger. So I'm not saying they've got nuclear weapons. I'm not saying they're an outright paper tiger, but in head-to-head conflict with conventional weaponry, Ukraine's doing very well. So the question is, will the West continue to be that ally that modernizes and upgrades and gives credits, and then for how long? So we're saying indefinitely, but the Ukrainian people are going to have an awful winter with their energy sector devastated. This again, what's it called? The criminal court, the International Criminal Court's got investigators on the ground, and they're finding case after case after case of just ill behavior from Russian troops. So the professionalism of the Russian military is even in question. And I've seen that. I think I mentioned this to you once before in a prior show. They're already documenting who reports to whom in the chain across these Russian occupied areas, person by person by person, all the way up to Putin. And he has replaced one of the key military leaders in between. So there's an acknowledgement that they're losing. There's an acknowledgement that there's a morale problem. And so it is a really good time to engage in diplomacy and get people's interests, bottom line needs, at least on paper. And so we could be at a turning point.
We will see what happens by next week. I know that Milley is trying, so We'll see. Okay, this brings us to predictions. Dave, what do you have?
So I know that dust is barely settled on our 2022 midterms, but there's already a lot of chatter about 2024, what's going to happen. We talked about Trump, but I've got another one for you. With this in mind, I want to highlight one of the intentional leaks making the rounds in D.C. for folks that aren't like us, pay a lot of attention to it. Republicans have made it known already they desperately want to control the Senate, and they have Joe Manchin in their crosshairs, senator from West Virginia. According to The Hill, that there's forces aligning behind West Virginia Attorney General Patrick Morrisey, who said that Manchin must pay a political price for the Inflation Reduction Act. His quote was, Senator Manchin deeply disappointed West Virginians and let them down tremendously when he supported the Build Back Broke bill. So Attorney General Morrissey already is saying he's got like $12 million dedicated to the primary race against Governor Jim Justice. So my prediction here is that the first salvo may have Manchin scrambling for an escape route from the onslaught to avoid this face-off that's pending. Potentially, he's going to throw his hat in the ring. This is my speculation. He'll throw his hat into the ring for the governor's race, where he might have better prospects as Governor Jim Justice runs for his seat.
Yeah, like they weren't going to run against him anyway. But anyways, I've got a prediction. The train strike that was averted, the third union has actually rejected the latest offer. There has been a lot of discussion. They're in a cooling off period. The trains unions have threatened strikes, which would put an immense pressure on the supply chain, would raise prices on everything from food to gases, would really make the inflation worse. But the train workers don't get paid sick leave. They are the scheduling is really harsh on them. The changes that have been proposed are just from a worker's perspective. No, there's no other industry that's like that. It would require money though to give them what they wanted. I'm thinking that with the new Congress, what's going to happen is that the current Congress is going to extend the cooling off period by kind of forcing a contract into the new Congress. And then with the moderates in the existing Congress, they probably will muscle through, even if there's a lot of Republican opposition, money in a new infrastructure bill. They'll probably call it a real Inflation Reduction Act to address the some of the infrastructure, and they'll bill it as supply chain relief, and they will get the funding to be able to give the unions at least some of what they want, and will avert that strike because they just can't let it happen. This is happening quietly. It's under the radar of a lot of the news we're seeing, but this is huge, and the government just can't let that strike happen. Anyway, we will be back next week. Until then, stay informed and stay engaged.